Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Political Lens Podcast. Today I thought it'd be good to talk about missing persons investigations with the elderly adults and how they investigate crime scenes of elderly adults versus young children. So without further ado, I want to get right into it. I would love to hear your guys' comments on the situation, what you think about this particular video, as well as how you feel about how they're doing in the Nancy Guthrie case and your thoughts about everything there as well. So let's get into it. When someone disappears, the circumstances surrounding that disappearance play a major role in how authorities respond. Investigators don't approach each missing persons case the same way because the age, the vulnerability, their medical conditions, and the likelihood of criminal activity all influence how an investigation unfolds. Now, the disappearance of an elderly individual, such as an 84-year-old woman like Nancy, presents a very different investigative profile than the disappearance of a 6-year-old child. Now, although both situations are treated with urgency, law enforcement agencies rely on different assumptions, investigative strategies, and research methods based off of historical data and behavior, as well as research about how people in those groups tend to disappear and where they most likely are to be found. Now, across the United States, hundreds of thousands of missing person reports are filed each year, and most are resolved quickly. The agencies like the National Crime Information Center track these reports, while organizations such as the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children assist the law enforcement agencies in locating the missing minors. Historically, the outcomes of investigative priorities differ depending on whether the missing person is a young child or an elderly adult. Now, children, particularly um, those under the age of 12, often trigger immediate large scale alerts and public mobilization because of the risks of the abduction and the exploitation. Elderly adults, especially those over the age of 80, are frequently classified as endangered or missing persons due to the potential for their medical conditions like dementia or Alzheimer's disease or other cognitive impairments that could cause disorientation and wandering. When elderly persons disappear, investigators usually begin by focusing on their medical vulnerabilities and the movement patterns. If someone like Nancy were reported missing at the age of 84, authorities would immediately try to determine whether she suffers from memory loss, whether she requires medication, and when she was last seen. The investigators also want to know what clothing she was wearing and whether she has access to vehicle and whether she may have left on foot. And in many cases involving the elderly individuals, with their cognitive impairments, law enforcement agencies activate a silver alert system designed to notify the public when an elderly adult is missing or believed to be in danger. The search strategies in these cases often rely on the patterns observed in previous investigations. The research has shown that elderly individuals suffering from confusion or dementia, they tend to travel relatively short distances and are frequently found within a few miles of where they were last seen. Because of the search and the teams that concentrate heavily on nearby areas would include wooded spaces, drainage areas, abandoned structures, or roadside locations where someone may have fallen or become trapped. Now, the authorities, they may deploy canine tracking units or drones, helicopters equipped with thermal imaging, and organized search teams to comb the surrounding areas. Excuse me. The neighbors, they may be interviewed, security cameras checked, and local hospitals contacted in case the individual has been admitted for medical treatment and they just weren't aware, the family wasn't aware. Some of the historical outcomes, however, in elderly missing persons cases reflect the dangers associated with the disorientation and exposure that many individuals are found within the first 24 to 48 hours. But the survival becomes less likely if the search extends for several days, especially if the person lacks food or water or their medication, like in Nancy's case, or even shelter. The falls, dehydration, and environmental exposure are among the most common causes of the deaths. Prolonged searches involving the elderly individuals can go on just as long as any other. In contrast, when a 6-year-old child goes missing, the investigators approach the case with a much stronger assumption that the criminal activity could be involved. The disappearance of a young child can quickly escalate into a major investigation that involves federal and national resources, including the Federal Bureau of Investigations and law enforcement. They must rapidly determine whether the children wandered away or was taken by a family member in a custody dispute, or they may have been abducted by a stranger. Because the risk of harm to a child increases um, rapidly as the investigators treat the first hours of the case so extremely critical. And if the authorities believe a child has been abducted and certain criteria is met, they may activate an Amber Alert, an emergency broadcast system that sends the information about the missing child to television stations, highway signs, mobile phones, and news outlets across wide regions. Now, this system is designed to involve the public, immediately increasing the chances, or giving the public the information immediately, increasing the chance that someone might, recognize a child or the suspect that's involved in the situation. Now, the investigative methods in a missing child case, it also differs significantly from those used in elderly searches. Police still often treat the child's last known location as a potential crime scene, careful, carefully documenting the evidence and interviewing many members and neighbors, examining the digital data, such as phone records and security cameras and online communications. The officers may also review registers of known offenders, track the vehicles seen in the area, and coordinate with national databases to search for any possible leads. There are also large volunteer search efforts that may also be organized with teams canvassing the parks, neighborhoods, and nearby buildings in the area. Historical research on missing children shows that many cases are resolved quickly, particularly when the child has simply wandered away or has been taken by a family member. However, the risk of a profile changes dramatically when a young child is abducted by someone outside the family. Studies have shown that the first 24 hours in the situations are the most crucial, which is why the authorities, they'll act as quick as possible to disrupt to distribute the most amount of information they can possible. Now, ultimately, the differences between these two types of cases highlight how age affects both investigative strategy and survival expectations. An elderly individual who disappears is often the focus of a search and rescue operation centered on medical risk and geographic proximity. The investigators assume that the person may be confused or injured or unable to find their way home. So they concentrate resources on nearby terrain and environmental hazards. And then, in contrast, when a young child disappears, the investigators must immediately consider the possibility of abduction or criminal intent, which leads to a broader alerts, larger investigation or investigative teams, and a much wider search radius. Now, both types of cases are treated with the seriousness and urgency that they deserve, obviously, but the methods used to solve them reflect the decades of research and experience gathered from thousands of investigations. Whether authorities are searching for an elderly adult who may have wandered away or a child who has been taken, the goal remains the same: to locate the missing person as quickly as possible and bring them safely back to their family. For investigators, every minute matters, and understanding the patterns associated with the different age groups help guide the strategies that can make the difference between tragedy and a rescue. Now, we've seen the case with Nancy Guthrie, especially with her being 84 years old. She was dropped off at home by her daughter's boyfriend or daughter, as well. It's not clear to me yet, but we also seen the doorbell footage of the suspect and the camera, and we understand that obviously that would be foul play, and they're looking for a disappearance of somebody who was abducted. So we know she didn't wander off. We know that her illness or whatever was wrong with her was not the reason she disappeared, that something more sinister obviously occurred. Now, like I said, the whole point of this video was to describe to you guys the differences between how they would handle a younger, like a young aged person's investigation compared to how they look at it in an old person's investigation. Now, the whole point of me doing this was not to be what people call ageist or whatever. It's just I thought it would be kind of cool to look at the differences in how they investigate in those two scenarios, and then bring it into what we know that the investigators have done so far in Nancy Guthrie's case, and what we could glean out of that, and how you guys may feel about how the investigation has gone so far. We're at day 37 and she's still missing. And I'm curious to know what you guys think. I would love all the feedback you guys want to give. I appreciate you, and I want to thank you for watching yet another episode of the Unfiltered Political Lens Podcast. And we'll see you in the next video. Thank you. Peace.